I'm sure most people in North America have seen this image before. A strong man with his protein shake advertising all of the wonderful things protein can do for you. It'll help you bulk up, it'll help you slim down. Anything you want, protein will help you get there. And because of all of this campaigning, we Americans eat quite a bit of protein. In fact, most of us get twice as much protein than we actually need. And when we have so much of something, it's easy to forget about those who don't have enough. 1 billion people around the world don't eat enough protein. And the problem is most severe in places like Central Africa and South Asia, where 30% of children have a protein deficiency. How are you supposed to get this vital nutrient when plants don't grow, animals can't live, and you don't even have enough water for yourself, let alone your plants? We need a protein source that can survive the harshest conditions on Earth. And turns out we have this already. It's called spirulina, and it's a type of cyanobacteria, otherwise known as blue-green algae, that has been around for 3.5 billion years. Yeah, that's a long time, before there was even oxygen on Earth. And growing spirulina is amazing because it doesn't require fertile land, unlike soil and unlike plants do with their soil. And the amount of land it requires in itself is already minuscule compared to plants and raising cattle. In terms of water, it also needs just a tiny bit compared to other protein sources. And another benefit of spirulina is that the water that it does need doesn't need to be fresh water. It can be brackish or even seawater. And this is what makes it so great. There's a lot of spirulina farms that are actually growing in the desert because it doesn't need that fertile land or fresh water. But since we're here to talk about protein, how does it face up there? It's actually 70% protein by dry weight, which is compared to beef 65 and soy's 35. And remember that this is dry weight, so the beef you're talking about is beef jerky. If you were to eat a steak, it would be more around 25% protein. And in addition to the protein that it offers, it has a plethora of other nutrients that most protein sources don't have. So it's kind of like a package deal. But how do you grow it? There's 3 methods of growing spirulina in an open, closed, or hybrid bioreactor. When you're growing it at home, like I did for a project I was working on, you usually use a an open or a hybrid bioreactor. And there's 4 main things that you need to pay attention to when growing spirulina. First of all, temperature. It likes things pretty warm, 30 to 37 Celsius. And if it's above or below, it could still grow, just definitely a lot slower. But if it gets to extremes, then it's going to die. In terms of lighting, if you don't use natural lighting, then use some sort of warmer wavelengths of light because that's what helps it grow the fastest. In terms of pH, it has a really high pH requirement between 9.5 to 11, which is easy to maintain if you use the right nutrients. And it is actually beneficial because it reduces the risk of contamination, but it's just something to keep in mind. And in terms of agitation, it does need something to mix it around and make sure that all of the individual cells get an even amount of sun exposure. When you're experimenting with nutrients, this is a great way to bump up the protein content for if you're growing it for protein deficiency, because what you feed the spirulina has plays a huge role in how the spirulina, the biochemical composition of the spirulina, how that will turn out. And for example, the most common medium used for growing spirulina is called the Zaruk medium, which actually does already give spirulina a very high protein content. But then if you were to use something like seawater as the growth medium, which is something that scientists have experimented with, that is a really cheap growth medium, and it does grow, or the spirulina does grow in it, but as a result, the effect on the biochemical composition is that the carbohydrate content skyrockets, whereas the protein and lipid content kind of goes down a bit. So then you put everything together and you put it into your bioreactor. And to kind of point out all of these components in here, The little device on top of the bioreactor on the left is the aquarium pump, which was my agitator. So it kind of pumps bubbles through the tubes into the black other tubes on the bottom of the tank, and those shoot bubbles out. And then on the right side of the left bioreactor, there's aquarium heater, and then it's in a nice sunny window. Then to harvest, you just scoop some of it out, pour it through some sort of fine mesh cloth, and that's pretty much it. You pour the nutrients back in the tank and add a little bit more like macronutrients and micronutrients, just to like make sure that the spirulina has enough to eat. But it's pretty hands-off and not much going on. For me, I enjoyed the spirulina in smoothies, yogurt, dips, all of the above. But for deploying this in regions where people don't get enough protein, common methods, or perhaps the most useful methods of getting it to people would be supplements, either drying the spirulina or just eating it on a spoon, honestly, just like plain, or candy for children. But for me, I think the most important method will be just incorporating it into local dishes, because that way people it just becomes a part of daily life. There's an organization called the Antenna Foundation that is helping places who don't have access to high quality nutrition, and they're helping them to grow their own spirulina, and it just becomes a part of the community. Everybody shares it, and which is why I think it's great, because it just becomes a part of their lives. So in summary, the 3 main reasons why spirulina is great for protein deficiency. Number 1, it is super cheap, and because 20 to 30% of the costs of growing spirulina come from post-processing, if you're growing it on site, then since you can eat it fresh because it's on site, so it doesn't need to last for a long time, it can reduce or almost completely get rid of this 20 to 30% of the cost. Number 2, it's just super easy to grow. I grew it at home by myself pretty much without much help, and kind of just figured it out. And it's really hands-off. You don't really have to pay attention to it at all. It just kind of grows by its own. You just have to harvest it. And number 3, the benefits are just so great. It's so nutritious, and it'll help people who have faced these horrible symptoms of protein deficiency to get better. So this is great because it can help relieve protein deficiencies that are already present. But then we have to consider the fact that with climate change, 150 million more people are expected to become protein deficient by 2050 due to rising CO2 levels. And Harvard found that this was because with rising CO2 levels, the protein content of staple foods like corn and rice actually goes down. But spirulina to the rescue once again. Not only is spirulina great at treating protein deficiency, it can help prevent what's causing these lower levels of protein in food in the first place. One refrigerator-sized container of algae sequesters the same amount of carbon as an entire acre of trees, which is almost an entire football field. So spirulina can act as both the vitamin and the painkiller to our protein deficiency problem, and help us as we move into the future and get more and more innovation going on to not leave anyone else behind.